Alrighty, you guys, without further ado, it is now time for our final chef of the day. She is the executive pastry chef at 16 Restaurant here in Chicago, a 2009 James Beard Rising Star Chef nominee, the winner of the 2011 Chicago Restaurant Pastry Competition, which was just announced, and a semi-finalist at the North American phase of the Valrhona C3 Culinary Competition. That is a mouthful. And you might also have seen her on Food Network's Extreme Challenge Candy Carnival. Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to the lovely Sarah Kosikowski right here. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
How are you? Welcome
Fabulous.
to the World Culinary Showcase.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, I understand you just got back from Russia, of all places?
I did. I vacationed in Russia this year.
Did you get any new dessert ideas or anything?
Unfortunately, I wasn't inspired, but I was inspired by alcohol. So I will be using a lot of alcohol on the terrace this summer.
Okay, so you're opening the dessert terrace at Trump?
It's all food. So it's our outdoor, we consider it almost a seasonal pop-up restaurant. So it only happens during the summer in the nice months.
A seasonal pop-up, I love
Exactly.
that. We were talking about pop-up restaurants. So are you all into the pop-up thing?
Yes and no.
Yes and no?
I like it, but I need a little bit more structure.
You need a little more structure?
So for the terrace, it's nice because we're open during, the beautiful summer months from May until October, and anyone in Chicago can appreciate that we need some really good outdoor weather.
And you're just about to introduce your spring dessert menu, I understand, at 16.
Correct.
So are you going to talk to us a little bit about that? What's on the spring dessert menu at 16?
Well, also with the weather, we're a little bit behind right now. It's been a little chilly, we had warm, now it's cold. So what I like to do that's always year-round is tropical. So that's actually what I'm going to be demoing today.
Yum. Well, I see we have got yummy, yummy, yummy buttery and chocolatey yumminess.
Yes.
And so with that, Sarah Kosikowski, I'm going to leave the stage to you. If you need me, I'll be right over here.
Fabulous.
And when you're ready for questions, you'll just let us all know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. This is my fabulous assistant, Ashley, who works with me at Trump. So what we're going to do today is one of my favorite desserts, chocolate pot de creme. I love chocolate, I love flavors. One of my favorite chocolate companies is Valrhona. So that's actually what I use in the whole hotel. So what we're gonna do is, as I mentioned, do something a little bit more tropical. Because in Chicago, you never know what you're gonna get. We get beautiful fruit in the summer, but it's a little bit inconsistent. So that being said, when you have flavors that you can use year-round that people enjoy, it makes our lives a little bit more enjoyable and easier. So what I'm gonna start with, so this is basically a 4-compartment dessert. So the first layer is going to be the pot de creme, which I will demo in a moment. And what I'm going to start with is a passion fruit fluid gel. So basically with the fluid gel, you don't use your traditional gelatin, you're going to use agar. So it's nice because it also makes this vegetarian and vegan, because we don't use the gelatin. So we try to use this in many applications in our kitchen because it is very versatile. So what I have is passion fruit puree. I have my sugar and my agar mixed together. You never want to add agar directly into your product because it will seize up and you'll have little pieces inside. So it's almost like making a jam, if anyone's made any compotes or fruit jams, when you're using pectin. You want to make sure that you have something to disperse it in. So I'm just going to sprinkle that over. And you also want to constantly whisk as you're adding this so that you don't have the aforementioned lumps. So agar is, there you go. Agar is nice to work with because it's fairly simple. The only thing you have to do is make sure that you bring it to a boil and that you actually react it. The other thing about agar that most people do realize after they start to use it is it's not thermoreversible, whereas gelatin is. So what that means is gelatin you can melt, set, and then remelt and set again. And you can basically keep doing that multiple times. Agar, once it's set, it's set. So it's an interesting application. As I was mentioning on the terrace, we're doing a little warm cakes, which we've been doing for 2 years now. And the center of them is actually an agar fluid gel. So what happens is we can take the cake batter, pipe that inside, and bake it, and it doesn't melt. So you still have this very interesting texture on the inside. So when you're making something like this, we call this a fluid gel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour this out once it comes to a boil, and I'm going to let it set in the refrigerator. And you'll see it turns into basically a hard gelée. Then I'm going to use one of my favorite tools in the kitchen, the Vitamix. And I'm not saying that because they're sponsoring it. I really do honestly love Vitamix. And what we do is we blend it down. And you get this smooth consistency that stays that way. Water won't seep out of it. It has a longer shelf life. So I bring this to a boil, and probably about 30 seconds, make sure it's a nice rolling boil. Remove that from the heat. Was citric in there as well? Okay. There's also a little bit of citric acid that I add to it. The citric helps that gelée just set up with the agar. Same concept as I mentioned in a jam with pectin. So I'm just going to pour this into a shallow pan. And I love the smell of passion fruit. Actually, if you want to take that. And then all we're going to do is let that set up for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the temperature of your refrigerator. Agar actually sets up very, very quickly, which also makes it a little bit difficult if you're using it for different applications. So it has its benefits and its disadvantages. Okay, so we'll do the pot de creme next. So while that's setting up, we're going to go on to our pot de creme. So today I'm using Tonori chocolate, which is a 64% chocolate made by Valrhona. It doesn't have as many acidic qualities as some of the other chocolates that I've used. It's quite smooth, it's very refined, and it's nice when you're using something like passion fruit, because this dessert has passion fruit and coconut in it, where you don't want another acidic quality. And dark chocolates have a tendency to have that bitterness, so this particular chocolate does not. So in order to make my pot de creme, you have several techniques. This is one of my favorite, is using the base technique of a creme anglaise. So I have my egg yolks. I'm going to add my sugar. And this is just basically, I'm sure if anybody has ever made creme anglaise or pastry cream, you know. I'm adding the sugar to my egg yolks to protect it, more or less. Because if you're going to add your eggs directly to your hot cream or milk, then you're going to have scrambled eggs. And that's not very tasty. So I'm just going to whisk that. And I don't know if I mentioned, but in my pot I do have cream and milk. I like to add both, gives it a little bit more. When you're making something with cream, it's extremely heavy. Yes, we're making desserts. Yes, they should be rich. But you don't want something that's so cloyingly sweet or that's so rich that you can't enjoy it. So whenever we do restaurant desserts at 16, we try to make sure that they're balanced in flavor. That you have the nice refined mouthfeel, that you have something that is delicious but that you want more. And it's not about portion size either. You know, I often don't eat desserts because I feel that they're too sweet. So we try to add a little bit of a savory accent to things, adding things with salt. The garnish on this dessert is actually a coconut almond rocher that's covered in milk chocolate. And in order to lend a little bit of that savory accent, we put ginger salt on top. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of my hot liquid. I'm just going to pour that over my yolk and sugar mixture. And this is pretty common, as I mentioned, so we don't have the scrambled egg effect. Now I can add that back to my mix. May I give you that, Ashley? Thank you. And I'm just going to cook this over kind of a low to medium heat until it does what we call nappe. I'll give you that one as well. So the term nappe refers to coating the back of the spoon. So basically what I want to happen is when I pull this out, I want to be able to run my finger down the spoon and be able to see that line. Now, to say that this isn't going to curdle, this is extremely hot stove, by the way. To say that it's not going to curdle or you're not going to get pieces of the egg, it's difficult, especially when you're making huge batches of this. So I have a couple tricks that I also impart that assist with that. One is that I always strain my anglaise. Two is that I always finish my product with an immersion blender. So that way I know no matter what happens, no matter who makes this in my kitchen, because as much as I'd love to be hands-on with every single thing that comes out of my kitchen, I can't be. So being, I'm sure as many of you know, a food service professional, you have to find tricks to make sure that everyone can make it the way that you would make it. And I'm a stickler for a smooth, creamy consistency. So I never want something leaving my kitchen that has lumps or chunks in it or that's grainy. And it has to do with technique, but it also has to do with the product that you're using as well. So, can we see that? Is it on here? I just want to show them the consistency. There we go. So, you can see it's already started to thicken. So, it's sticking to my spatula, it looks good. You don't want to go over. Again, with cooking eggs, carry over cooking. So no matter what you do, when you take this off the heat, this is going to continue to cook unless you ice it down immediately. So I know that as I'm going, this is going to keep cooking. So I remove it from the heat, give it a couple more stirs, and then I'm going to strain this. And as I mentioned, this is going to get those little particles out that are inevitable. When you're using anything, we use pre-packaged yolks that are pasteurized just for safety concerns and ease. But if you're using fresh, you're going to have the little pieces of the white in there somewhere, just to make sure that it's nice and smooth. So I'm going to strain that out. I'm also going to need a smaller Bane to burr mix in because I'm going to mix in that bowl. So then I have my anglaise. I'll give you this. So when I'm doing something that involves chocolate, and this could be a pot de creme, it could be a chocolate ganache, it could be a chocolate gelée, a glaze, anything that involves chocolate, there's a specific procedure to make sure that you keep that texture and basically the elasticity. So what you want to do is you want to create an emulsion. And by that, I like to call it chocolate mayonnaise. So I always make sure that my chocolate is melted, and you want to make sure that it's melted to about 40 to 45 degrees Celsius. I have my hot liquid. In this case, it's going to be the creme anglaise, whereas it could be hot cream, it could be hot milk if you're just making ganache, it could be your hot neutral glaze if you're making a chocolate glaze. Can I have a whisk too? Thank you. So, when I went to school, the trick was basically you take your chocolate in pieces or your chocolate that's chopped, you take your hot liquid over the top, you pour it over, mix, and you're done. And this was before anybody even told me to use a burr mixer either. So now as I've learned, thanks to my good friends at Valrhona and their wonderful training, there's so much more to it. Basically, you want to make that texture, and by that texture, you get longer shelf life, you get a better mouthfeel. So that texture comes from the emulsion. Start with a little bit of your liquid, whatever it may be, over the melted chocolate. And essentially, it's going to break. You want it to break. You want it to be chunky. You don't want it to look nice whatsoever. As you keep mixing, you see that some of the oil and the fat starts to come out. And you can see it's not very nice. It's kind of grainy. And it also depends on what chocolate you're using. I find that Tonori actually doesn't break as bad as some of the other chocolates, which doesn't mean it's not going to work. They're just different varying cocoa percentages make a difference. It also has to do with the temperature on everything that you're working with. So as I keep mixing this, I'm not really going to get anywhere. So I'm going to make sure that that's all incorporated. And I'm going to add just a little bit more. Depending on the size of the batch that I'm doing, I usually do this in 3 or 4 additions. So I add a little bit more of my mixture, and you're going to see the texture is going to start to change already. Elasticity is crucial for the texture of any chocolate item. And this also works for a mousse as well. So now it's still a little grainy, but I'm getting shine, which is something that we definitely want to see. You can also do this with a spatula. You can also do this with a straight burr mixer, but I find using a whisk, as long as it's okay that you don't incorporate a small amount of air, I find that the whisk really breaks up the chocolate better. So now I'm looking really nasty. This I could not serve in my restaurant. This I could not eat. And it's not that it's even grainy, it's just the fat in the cocoa butter and the fat in my cream. They're trying to come together. So now I have that really disgusting, broken looking chocolate, but that's exactly what I want. It starts to almost pull away from the sides of the bowl as I start to mix. Now I'm going to add a little bit more. And again, I'm not adding too much when I do this. And it's a painstaking process, but the end result is so worth it. I have a kitchen full of people trained to know the difference. And everyone can see this on the screen, correct? Because it's kind of magical, for lack of a better word. Now you see the difference. Just a little bit more of the liquid, a couple more strokes of the whisk, night and day. That's what I'm looking for. So I know that I've done everything right. I know that I'm on the right path to getting that consistency, to that elasticity, to that shelf life. At this point, I would probably add a little bit more in one addition, but my base is made, so I'm good. So I'm just going to add the rest in there. Probably 2 additions. Also, I have a little bit on the side that I will add is sorbitol. Sorbitol also, and I like to use the powder form because I don't like to add any more liquid. Some people use liquid sorbitol, but when you add more liquid to a product like this, you basically reduce its shelf life. And I'm not working necessarily in an environment where I'm making bonbons or I'm making chocolates for production where I need a 5-week shelf life. Most of the items I'm doing are quite fresh. They're served in the restaurant. They're made very, very consistently on a daily basis, if not several times during the day, depending on what it is. But the sorbitol also adds to that elasticity. So that's why I like to add a little bit at the end. There you go, ma'am. So now that I have my base, if you feel that at any point something happened or that it's not necessarily as smooth as you'd like, you can also strain it again through a chinois. I'm pretty confident about this one, so I don't think I'm going to do that. So I'm going to keep that one, but I'm going to give you this. So now what I'm going to do to finish this is I am going to use the burr mixer. One thing that is one of my pet peeves, again, that Ashley will will let you know, is air bubbles induced by the burr mixer. So if I'm gonna burr mix in a vessel like this, I have more surface area and it's not that full. If this was a full bowl, it'll be fine. It's not. So what I wanna do is I wanna use something smaller, and I'm gonna get a depth and less surface area. Because the minute your burr mixer goes above your mix, you basically have incorporated air. And again, it goes with shelf life. Air and moisture cause mold or cause the product to go bad. And it's also not aesthetically pleasing. Like if you're burr mixing a chocolate glaze and then you're gonna glaze a cake, nobody wants to pay whatever you're charging for a cake with little air bubbles all over it. And then can you also give me a clean spatula back, because I'll put it in the doser. And can I get a wet towel? So, when I put my burr mixer into my mix, I don't turn it on, I'm gonna tap it out. By tapping it out, I'm getting out the air bubbles that I just incorporated, putting the burr mixer in. Because basically the minute you put it in, you put in air. So I'm gonna tap out that air. Now I'm gonna turn it on. There's also a sound that's different too. Essentially, if you're burr mixing or even robo-cooing or doing anything properly, you should be taking air out of your product. So I have large air bubbles that have come to the surface because I got the air out. Same can be done if you have a larger batch. Did you unplug it? Using a larger batch, you can also use the RoboCoo for the same thing. It gets all the air out. Thank you. So with this, I'm gonna serve it in a glass. You can do this in basically anything you'd like. You can serve this on its own. Just for a fine dining restaurant, we like to add a lot of different flavor profiles and components to it and textures. But you could do this just in a little ramekin. You could just serve it in a bowl. As long as it sets up in the fridge, it's fine. You know what, I think I should have enough. I'll just give you that. Thank you. This is my fancy little doser. And then again, the amount, I just want to make sure when I'm doing this that I have balanced flavors. So obviously the chocolate is my focal point, but you want to make sure that when you get through every single layer, you're having all the flavors that are supposed to pair with it. And once you refrigerate this, chocolate has a tendency to, you want it to crystallize. So you basically want the chocolate to set up. Has a tendency to work best overnight. But I would say as long as it's in the fridge for about 6 hours, it'll be perfect. I also don't really recommend freezing this because you will get ice crystals and then you're not gonna have that really nice consistency anymore. So we're gonna pop these in the refrigerator. You got that? Thank you. So while the pot de creme is setting up and while the fluid gel is setting up, we're gonna talk about tempering chocolate. So what I like to do, as Charles was saying, I travel a lot. I love to go to France. I was there 2 years ago and came back and was obsessed with chocolate rocher, to the point where I want to put everything in a chocolate rocher. So a chocolate rocher is usually traditionally almonds that are coated in a sugar syrup that you bake, you toast them, and then you toss it with milk and or dark chocolate, whichever your preference is. So it's kind of like a candy. So what I started to do was add whatever I wanted to the rocher, because I didn't want to limit myself. So what we started making is one that imparts the traditional almonds that have been toasted, but we're using sliced almonds. Then we've added on toasted coconut using the fine coconut râpé, feuilletine flakes, which are basically ground up pirouette cookies, and then muscovado streusel. So basically I'm making cookie crumbs out of muscovado sugar. So this literally was a throw everything in a bowl test that now has stuck. And then to garnish it, just as a little finishing touch, we have the ginger salt. So what I have here, do you have the thermometer as well? Oh, thank you.
Right here.
So we won't do the full process, but I did want to discuss it. So I have all my ingredients here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to temper this chocolate. So there's several methods for tempering. My favorite is basically to do what they consider the seeding method. So I'm going to bring my chocolate up to temp, which is usually about 45, no more than 50, especially if you're working with, I'm talking in Celsius, my apologies. If you're using milk chocolate, you want to go a little bit lower, the same with white chocolate. So we're going to bring this up to temp. We're basically going to reduce it down, bring it back up slightly. That's where the seeding method is made so easy with an immersion blender that I basically use the heat of the immersion blender to bring it back up. So I won't use that. Yeah. And so what I'm going to do after that, mix everything together, spread it on my silk pat, put a little of the ginger salt on, and we're good. So we have our chocolate basically in temper, just for the sake of time, and I could basically stand up here for the next 2 days and talk about chocolate tempering. But if you're not familiar with it, the concept of it is to get your crystals aligned within the chocolate with the heat and the agitation so that you have that finished texture of the snap, of the shine that everyone's familiar with. So when you go to the store and you buy a chocolate bar, that chocolate bar is in temper. So the minute that you melt it down on a hot day in your car in Chicago, and then you go home and you put it back in the refrigerator and it turns white, it's not bad, it's not unedible, but you don't have that mouthfeel anymore, because what's happened is all your crystals are not in line anymore. So you don't have that mouthfeel, you don't have that snap, you don't have the texture. So you can still eat it, but it's not as enjoyable. And that bloomy the bloomy white kind of color coming out is that separation of the crystals, and that's not what you want. So of course, when we're serving something in the restaurant, it has to be aesthetically pleasing as well as pleasing to your palate. So, do you have ginger salt? Yes. So as I mentioned, this is basically in temper, so I am going to go with this. And we do have the finished product as well. And then we'll go with the fluid gel next. So I'm going to pour my chocolate over my mixture. And everything that I'm pouring this over is room temperature. You want to make sure that your toasted almonds are already cooled. And just gently folding so that I'm getting everything distributed properly, getting a nice coating on everything. Actually, one of our chefs at work took all the scraps of this one day, put milk over it, and ate it for breakfast. I don't know if I recommend that, but he said it was delicious, so. And then I did Bacon Fest a couple weeks ago, which seems maybe odd for a pastry chef, but it was so much fun. And I did a rocher with dark chocolate and bacon bits in it. So the rocher literally has become one of our staples in the restaurant. And this particular one that I'm making started as a garnish in the restaurant on a coconut and chocolate dessert and turned into a giveaway. So now every guest that leaves the restaurant gets a small bag of this rocher. And I don't think I mentioned the chocolate that I'm using is Caramelia, also made by Valrhona. And what it is it's a milk chocolate that has caramel flavor to it. But it's not too sweet. It doesn't really impart more sweetness. It imparts flavor. It's amazing. I'm not a huge fan of milk chocolate because it is a little bit too sweet for me. This one, they have to hide the bag on me because I will eat it every single day. So then I have a silk pat on my pan because you don't want it to stick. I'm just going to spread that out. And the rocher is nice because it's somewhat of a rustic candy. So that's why, we can use it as a garnish in the restaurant. You can eat it, you can snack on it, make it for Christmas gifts. You know what my family gets every year for Christmas. And then before this sets up, I have the ginger salt. So this is actually Thai ginger salt, that it's salt that already has the ginger flavor. You could use regular sea salt as well. But I just like that we're not only adding that salty kind of savory touch, but we're also imparting flavor. And when you just have a nice little piece of this with that big piece of salt, it changes the whole flavor profile. So we will let that set up on the side. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I see it though? Ooh. So, the cooler isn't quite cold enough, but I do have some that we did previously. But as you can see, it started to set up on the edges. It's still a little bit warm, that center, and this will probably happen within the next like 10, 20 minutes. Like I said, it just depends on the temperature of your refrigerator, but you can see how it instantly just sets up to a gelée consistency. The difference with an agar gelée, which you can use this just as this as well. You don't have to do the blending process. The difference is though, it's where a gelatin will kind of melt in your mouth, the agar gelée will be a little bit chewier. So I do use an application where I don't want something to melt or I'm putting it with something hot. I will use an agar gelée, but I tend to use a gelatin gelée just because of the mouthfeel. Actually, I'll give that back to you. So this is the fluid gel that we did previously, and as I was mentioning, it's very rubbery. It's set, it's very rubbery. Now we're going to blend this on our Vitamix. And I kind of just break it up a little bit just to make sure that it's going to blend smooth. Thank you. This is one of the tools in the kitchen that for some reason everyone thinks or that's shocked that a pastry chef uses it. But I finish a lot of things in the Vitamix because it gives me that texture that I'm looking for. I finish things like apple butter in here where you're going to do this to it. You're going to put it through the food mill. You're going to do as much as you can to get that texture. You'll never get it as smooth as finishing it in here. So then this is just going to blend. So I don't recommend that at home with the spatula. And the irony to that is, this is a smaller batch. If you have a larger batch, you won't have a problem. But as it was mentioned, I was on Candy Carnival, the Food Network Challenge. On the actual day of the event, I blended a spatula doing that because I wasn't paying attention. So I looked down at my mix and I have pieces of white going through it. And it was not a good day. Luckily, they didn't air that. They only aired the part where I broke something, of course. So it is kind of dangerous to do that because you have to be very careful. They also have, I know you had it on the table, the little plunger, which we call the pushing stick. But that doesn't always get around those sides because, as you can see, it's nice and smooth. Took me 2 seconds. Depending on the product, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. I do a coconut fluid gel, but in order to make sure that the fat kind of has to warm up in order to adhere to everything, you want to use the heat of the VitaPrep. So that one spins for a little bit longer. So I'm going to put this into my piping bag. Now, this will stay at this consistency indefinitely. And I've actually started to freeze these if we make large batches, and they freeze very, very well. Certain ones you have to reblend, but it's super easy. So the other thing that we use these for is almost like a, thank you, like a coulis on the plate. Because you're not, some people make like a fruit sauce and they add a little bit of xanthan, which is going to absorb any of that extra water so it doesn't seep out on the plate. But if you use too much xanthan, you're going to have that gummy kind of like snotty consistency. So when you're using something like this, you have something that's vegan, something that's vegetarian, something that you can't taste, but imparts the texture that you're looking for. So like at the restaurant, we have a number of fluid gels on hand at any given time for whatever dishes we're working on. And if, brought the worst scissors possible, if a vegan comes in, I mean, what do? We don't always have, you know, I do a lot of gluten-free lately because it's become extremely popular, but you can't always have something on hand at the drop of a dime. So what we started doing is doing fruit plates, which sounds really basic, but doing really intricate, nice fruit plates with freeze-dried fruits, with the fluid gel, so that you make someone feel that you've gone out of the way for them to give them something really, really special, and not just throwing them a bowl of berries. So I'm just gonna fill that up. And these are my set, can I have that towel? These are my set pot de creme. And also it's nice because when you're working with something like a fluid gel, you're usually using a puree. Well, fruit purees, if you cook them too long, you're gonna lose the color. And you're also gonna start to compromise the flavor. So with an agar, since you only boil it for pretty much less than a minute, you're getting a really, really fresh flavor on it. So I'm just gonna add this. And as I mentioned, this isn't gonna do anything really. It'll stay this is a little warm, so it might thicken slightly when I pop it back in the refrigerator, but it will be creamy, it will be smooth. Thank you. So you know what, I can leave these out, that's fine. I can leave these out, it's fine. I'll give that back to you. So because I've got creamy and creamy, I want to add some texture to this. So I'm going to add texture in two different ways. One is by the rocher that we just made, that'll be the finishing garnish, that'll tie the chocolate to the top and the bottom. It'll add in some of the coconut flavor. Also what we're going to do is macerated coconut. So do you have like something that I can shave this on, or I'll shave it over the bowl, it's fine. So fresh toasted coconut, buy a coconut, crack it open, take the hard shell off. On a mandolin, we're just gonna shave that. I will try not to shave my fingers. As it tells me right here, watch your fingers. As if I would purposely do anything. And then what we're gonna do is we're just gonna toast this. And I have it already toasted for the sake of time. I love using fresh toasted coconut. I also use, like I mentioned, the very fine coconut râpé. But other than that, I don't like using sweetened coconut, with the exception of a few applications, because I think it's just so sugary that you don't get the flavor of the coconut. So then I just have my flakes, toast that off to get this. Let me put those in there. This really should be done overnight. But unfortunately, I know as probably everyone has mentioned today, I cannot give you samples. So you'll just have to come to the restaurant to try it. You can use, I have coconut puree and I have coconut milk. I choose to use the coconut puree because I feel that it's a little bit fattier, has a little bit more flavor. There is a slight amount of sugar added to most of your purees, which in this case is nice, because I'm not using sweetened coconut, so I kind of want that. So I'm going to take my coconut. And then I'm just going to put that puree over the top. And the type of coconut puree you use does make a difference. That's why I do recommend, if you don't know, use the coconut milk. I use a couple different brands and they vary in the fat content. This one happens to have pieces of coconut in it already. That makes a difference as well. So basically I just want to soak that toasted coconut, and that's why letting it sit overnight is nice, because it soaks up a lot of that. So you're left with something that still has a texture to it, but it's different. It's not soggy necessarily, and it's not crunchy anymore either. Just a little bit of sugar on the top, and then a pinch of salt. And then Ashley, if you just want to clear out this stuff and grab me the spoons and the finished rocher. So, as I mentioned, if you let it sit overnight, it'll soak up a lot more of that juice. So we have our Tenori dark chocolate pot de creme. We have the passion fluid gel on top. I'm going to take a little bit of this coconut. And I'm just going to put that right on top of our passion. And get a smaller spoon. I always forget with these glasses I can't fit as much in. So we'll just put a little bit inside there as cleanly as possible. So now we're adding different colors to it, we're adding different textures. And using a glass is great because you get all those varied textures, you get a really cool vessel, and you can do things that you couldn't normally do on a plate. Because when you're holding something up on its own, you have to add a lot more stabilizers or more gelatin to something, and then you kind of start to lose it. In a glass, you're basically working with something that probably couldn't hold up on its own. So then, I'm all set with that, Ashley, if you want to take that. And I probably need a little wipe too. And I started using glasses in the restaurant about, let's say 5 months ago, because it was something that we always thought was too delicate. We started doing these really beautiful little champagne glasses with a strawberry fraisier in it, which is something that's traditionally made in a cake form. So instead of making a very traditional cake and slicing it or trying to do another take on it, we're layering it in the glass and using pistachios, and it's really turning out beautiful. So now I have the finished rocher. So you can see we have our chocolate is tempered. It's got nice crisp to it. We're just going to put a nice piece on top to add that texture, to impart the flavor. And again, aesthetically, now you're looking at something that you have the chocolate on the bottom, you have the chocolate on the top. And like I said, scraps are usually devoured of this. And there we have our finished dessert, the Tenori chocolate pot de creme with passion and coconut. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chef Kosikowski. Who has a question for the chef this afternoon? I know you guys must, oh, right here in the front row, yes.
So where can we get this recipe?
That is an excellent question. If you'd like to talk to me afterwards, I can definitely let you know.
So you mentioned that you participated in a dessert event that had bacon involved.
Yes.
What do you really think of the whole bacon dessert trend?
The irony is I actually don't eat bacon. I'm a vegetarian. But I have a dessert on my menu right now that has bacon in it, which is blackberries, maple syrup, and bacon. I love using maple syrup in the spring because it's kind of the season, whereas of course it's great in the fall, but with blackberries and with some salt and some pepper. So I imparted little, we're using Newski's smoked bacon, kind of cooking it up in a little bit of a caramel before so it does impart a little bit sweet, and then just sprinkling over the top the blackberries, and it's excellent. But I love bacon in desserts. Not that I necessarily eat it, but I will try it. And I don't understand, some people love it and some people don't like it. It's very, some people are all about it.
And what about new trends in desserts? What are you looking at? What are you thinking about?
It's interesting because I think trends influence all of us, but at the same time, I keep reverting back to the classics. Because especially when I travel, the Rocher is a perfect example of that. It's a classic, but we've tried to reinvent it several times. Working with things in a glass, taking something, as I mentioned, the Fraisier, which is extremely French, extremely classic, but kind of doing our own spin on it. And I mean, people have been doing this now for years, but I think I keep reverting back to the classics.
When did you begin making desserts?
I started making desserts when I was in high school, basically. I used to bribe my teachers when I was late with treats or...
Like what was the specialty in the beginning?
I made a lot of pies. I was always, to this day, if I see somebody that I went to high school with, when I liked a boy in high school, I would bake him a pie. So it was kind of a sign.
What kind of pies are you into baking these days?
Apple's my favorite. I'm from
Apple?
Michigan, so baking like apples, it's huge apple country. But I started baking really when I was in high school, and then as soon as I graduated, went right to the Culinary Institute of America.
Any other questions? Yes, we do. We're right over here for Chef Kosikowski.
Chef Sarah, that's really a cool dessert, and I like the idea of eating downward, vertically, which I think, whether it's savory or sweet, is a great idea. But my question is, what utensil do you serve that with, and how exactly is it eaten?
So it's exactly how you said. The question was like, how was it eaten? I don't know if you could hear it. Longer spoon, iced teaspoon, something that'll reach down to the bottom. And it is a challenge because a lot of times we're serving, when we do buffets, little shot glasses. If we don't serve the right utensil to get all the way down to the bottom, you're absolutely right. And for me, I always thought it was kind of like, oh, this is easy. You go all the way down, come up, go all the way down, so you get all the flavors. But I found that unless we kind of explain that to people, most people will go layer by layer by layer. So then what happens is you don't really want a whole mouthful of just passion fruit because it's made to be a composed dessert. So what we've started to do is really, I've done one of two things. I'm doing smaller, like I was mentioning in the verrine, that's about this high, so that you have no choice but to go all the way down. And then the other thing is that we're actually talking with the guests. So we're explaining to them, the chef recommends that you eat it this way, just because we want them to have a good experience. Because if this comes back to me in the kitchen and I see that they only ate the top and they didn't touch this, I'm going to be mortified. And that has happened because they don't understand, like they get this and they're like, oh, this is just, it's too sweet or it's too sour. They don't understand that it has to be all the way. So we've been really working with the front of the house staff, because I do a lot for lunch as well, to get everything in one bite.
We have another question.
What's the ratio, liquid to agar?
That kind of depends on what you're using. Usually it's about 900 grams to 1 kilo of, sorry, I'm talking grams in Celsius, to about 8 or 9 grams of the agar, so your liquid. But it depends. If you're using water, it's going to take a lot, exactly. So it's going to change depending on what it is. Whenever I'm using a fruit puree, and again, it always changes because your sugar is adjusted. When I'm doing something that most of your commercial fruit purees will have 10% sugar, but maybe I want something that's a little bit more sweet, or I'm making my own puree. Or I'm making a savory fluid gel where I don't want any sugar, which means I'm going to have more of a water content. We did one for savory that was olive oil. That was really interesting. And that one I cannot think of the ratio off the top of my head because they did so many experiments with it because you're dealing with a fat. So it's interesting. But fluid gels are one thing that we love using in the kitchen. Plus they're awesome.
Any other questions? Are we good? Well, Chef Sarah Kosikowski, we have been delighted to have you here today. We are inspired by your creation here. Of course, I get to taste it because they don't care if I die. But I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. Thank you so much. A pleasure.
Thank you.
And we will have you back again next year, I'm sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.